Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. Just a few housekeeping things before we get started. I want to introduce, actually, first and foremost, Jessica Loff, who is going to be leading this webinar today. We're very thankful to have her and her expertise here today. Just a heads up, we've got everybody right now on mute. If you do have any questions, feel free to type in your questions on the questions tab on your control panel there, and we will be able to. We're going to have a period to basically ask and answer questions at the end that we will address at that time. Before we just talk a little bit about what we're going to be discussing today and what Jessica's going to be discussing today, rather, I just wanted to let Dave Raquel from 360 Energy here just give a little bit of an introduction as well.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us in the webinar, Leading the Transition Towards a Low-Carbon Economy. I'm really excited and looking forward to this presentation. I just want to make sure everyone understands 360 Energy's role is to actually engage our customers and get the marketplace aware of things that can be considered to reduce energy costs and also GHG emissions. And so we have and will continue to provide a variety of webinars going forward to assist in this area. I'm really pleased because there's been a lot of chatter about GHG emissions and what different people are doing. I want to make it very clear here with Jessica's involvement. This is a work that Alberta is doing, and the Alberta government is actually actively involved in. So I think there's a lot of perception of what is going on across the country, and I can tell from my experience in Alberta, in many areas they're leading this transition. So I'm looking forward for Jessica's presentation. I'm sure everyone will be fully engaged and understand. I will make one slight modification. There will be some questions that will percolate throughout the presentation. So we will stop, if we can, Jessica, and ask some questions that come up as we go along as well at the end. So Julie, thank you for that, and Jessica, we're really looking forward to your presentation. I think Julie would like to give a description and detail of Jessica's expertise and experience, so everyone has an understanding of what she has available here. Okay?
Great, thank you, Dave. So yeah, just a little bit about Jessica before we hand things over to her and get started on today's presentation. So Jessica Loff is a research lead for the Canadian Energy Systems Analysis Research Initiative, so CSER, at the University of Calgary, with special interest in low carbon transition pathways for Canada's transportation systems. Jessica is also actively exploring hydrogen economy ecosystems and evaluating system-level opportunities and trade-offs while connecting with stakeholders. Jessica joined CSER with more than a decade of business experience in the railway and trucking sectors. Throughout her career, she's designed transportation and logistics solutions that enable economic potential and drive operational efficiency in a vast array of industries, including wind energy, oil and gas, automotive, and global trade. Jessica has a Master's of Science degree in Sustainable Energy Development, a Bachelor of Commerce financial degree, and a professional designation with the Canadian Institute of Traffic and Transportation. So without further ado, again, we're really happy to have Jessica here today, so I will hand things over to her to get started with today's presentation. Thank you, Jessica.
Well, thanks, Julie and David, for that kind introduction. And hello, everyone, and thanks for joining me today. And thank you to the crew at 360 Energy Inc. for hosting and organizing this webinar. As Julie kindly mentioned, that I am a researcher based out of the University of Calgary and part of the CSER initiative. And what CSER initiative is, we are an interdisciplinary group that works really to deeply understand and analyze and model all of Canada's energy systems. And this can include power generation, industry, agriculture, and of course, transportation, which I am a part of. The core root of all of CSER's work is really taken through the lens of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and really reaching our climate change goals. Our work follows the methodology that is put forth from our sister organization, the Transition Accelerator. It's a new not-for-profit that has grown out of our work. And we are strategically aligned with the Alberta Motor Transport Association, in particular with our work in the transportation sector. And we are partnered with them for the AZTech project, which is going to be a topic of discussion in the webinar today. So without further ado, I'm just going to dive right into the material of the webinar here. If I can work this presentation. Okay. So I'm going to start the presentation out with the grand challenge, which is the greenhouse gas reduction challenge, the climate change challenge. This chart here really shows us how we've progressed to date and where we stand in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So here we are now in 2019, right? We have not made a great deal of progress. And this is despite the country putting forth initiatives to progress and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We argue this is because that we are focused on incremental changes that are driven by carbon policy. Now, ahead of us, we have very large greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets that are set forth by the Paris Accord that was set in 2015. And that is going to require us to reduce our emissions by 30% by 2030 and another 80% or an 80% reduction by 2050. And also recently announced the Liberal government wants to achieve a net zero greenhouse gas emission profile by 2050. These goals are enormous, and they're not going to be able to achieve by incremental improvement, because at the same time, we also want to achieve economic growth. We want to grow our population, and we want to maintain all the amenities and conveniences of our modern day lifestyles. We can't do this in the margins. We now have to look for transformative systems levels changes that really address more than just reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We need systems level changes that improve the whole system on a whole. So how do we achieve this type of transformation? Well, we have to build the transitions pathway to get there. So this slide here really represents the philosophy and the ethos that CSER and the Transition Accelerator follows. We like to see ourselves as we're headed out on a hike, we're headed towards to climb a large mountain. We're here at the bottom, the base of the mountain here, walking our dog as an energy system, but we want to get to this top of this very high mountain, the peak of the mountain. And this is where we can achieve our goals of the 80% reductions or the net zero emissions targets, and we can have the improved energy system that we want to achieve. And how we get there is we start to introduce a series of innovations along this pathways. So these innovations can be technology innovations, they can be social innovations or business model innovations, but they really need to meet a set of criteria in order for them to get us to where we need to go. Firstly, they have to be credible. They have to be financially credible, technically credible, socially credible. This is very important. If it doesn't hold water, it's not going to get us to where we need to go. Secondly, and this is very important, it has to be compelling. The key stakeholders and the users of the energy system have to want the change. Investors have to want to invest in this change. It can't be something that is forced upon us like we're trying to force feed our children vegetables. We have to want this. It has to be desirable. And then lastly, and this is also very critically important, the change and the innovations have to be capable of getting us to that top of the very high mountain. It has to be capable of reducing our emissions by 80%, or at least be on the pathway to get us there. If we're focused on getting really short-term gains that are on a different pathway and are nowhere near on the pathway that we need to go to get our long-term goals, perhaps this is a dead-end pathway, and perhaps it's a waste of time and effort and resources. We need to look elsewhere. I'm sure all of you, through your respective industries, can think of instances where there's been an initiative or a policy that's been put in place that is really focused on getting those short-term wins, but is in the wrong directions. And then at some point, you have to turn around and start over again. We're at a point in our climate crisis where we can't go on these false pathways anymore. We need to see that we're working towards that long-term target of that 80% emissions reduction target or more. So today we're talking about transportation and road freight transportation in particular. So let's try to apply this philosophy to this sector. So again, we'll start with greenhouse gas emissions. This sector is a large greenhouse gas emitter. Freight transportation in particular represents about 8% of Canada's total greenhouse gas emissions. But it is also thought to be one of those very hard to decarbonize sectors. So how do we do this? How do we get from where we are now to the top of that high mountain there? How do we get to that 8% reduction in something that's been traditionally very hard to decarbonize? Sure, we've introduced initiatives in the past, and we continue to actually, to reduce emissions in this sector through fuel efficiency improvements, through improved engine design, improved fuel efficiency, aerodynamics, improved operating behaviors, those types of things. But let's be realistic. This sector relies on burning a diesel fuel, a fossil fuel, and it's going to have greenhouse gas emissions, and it is an essential sector for our economy. So how do we get there? Well, we have to make the problem bigger. We need to look beyond these greenhouse gas emissions, and we got to see what else is going on in the sector. How can we also improve this system? So in the road freight sector, we don't have to look far for other problems. Beyond greenhouse gas emissions, this sector is troubled with air pollution. It's troubled with congestion, accidents. At a business level, they're plagued with high maintenance costs, high operating costs in general. They suffer from poor load factors, and they're also facing an extreme labor shortage. Nobody wants to be a truck driver anymore. These are all very serious problems that are really impacting this sector. But we see this as an opportunity. This is actually good news. This means that the sector is really poised for change and really ready for innovation. And it is true. The sector has become a hotspot for emerging innovations. Recently, I was talking to a CEO of a large trucking company here in Canada, and he said, well, trucking has never been so cool. It's never been such a cool place to work. And this is remarkable, right? Remarkable for the industry. And all types of innovations are emerging, from the autonomous vehicle, digital connectivity, the physical internet, e-commerce, all these types of things. These are all fantastic. But the kingpin of them all is really the electrification of freight transportation, of the road freight, of the trucks. And this is absolutely necessary for us to get to that peak of that high mountain, to get the 80% emissions reductions targets. And the challenge is going to be, how can we direct all these other innovations so that to reinforce the adoption of the electrification of the freight sector?
We've had a question come in on the chat, Jessica, asking which is the better option, battery electric like Tesla Semi, or hydrogen fuel cell electric like Nikola?
Right, and that's an excellent question, and it comes up in almost every presentation that I give. And you know what? It really depends. It really depends. Actually, I'll step back. They're both similar technologies. They're both electric powertrains, so they both provide a similar service. But which is better is going to depend on the region that you're operating and the service that you're providing, really the duty cycle that is provided. Both definitely have their own sets of pros and cons, and something that I want to dig in a little deeper here. And actually, I'm going to start that out right now. And we're going to start with physics and a little thermodynamics, if you will. So when we look at the powertrain, so it's the motor of the truck, what makes the truck move, we compare to the existing technology, which is the internal combustion engine, the diesel internal combustion engine. This engine, this powertrain, has a typical efficiency of 35%. And what this really means is, for every liter of diesel that is consumed, 65% of it is wasted as heat. 65% of the money is wasted. 65% of the energy is wasted. And this is a concern. But as we start to introduce electric components, we start to see gains in efficiency. So if we start have a hybrid drivetrain, we improve efficiency from 35 to, let's say, 43, give or take. But then when we get to a full battery electric system, so you're on an electric motor with a battery that supplies the electricity, we're at 68% efficiency. This is a very efficient system. It's a very efficient machine with very little, relatively very little energy waste. This is excellent. I mean, when we have the hydrogen fuel cell electric, it is less efficient because we have that extra set of conversions where we're converting hydrogen to electricity using a fuel cell. But at 49%, it is still an efficient system, and it is efficient trucks. And really, contrary to what thermodynamic diehards have to say, there are other factors that we definitely need to consider when we decide which is better for the operations that the truck drivers are providing. So in our analysis, we did a comparison of three different options, three different technologies options, the biodiesel, the battery electric, and the hydrogen fuel cell electric, and compared it back to that existing technology, the diesel internal combustion engine. And we evaluated on other factors like power and torque. The electric powertrain is a very powerful technology. So it's going to have very high levels of power and torque, which is very important to the road freight transportation sector, as they're handling very heavy loads through varying conditions. But when we take a look at other considerations, there is a difference between the hydrogen fuel cell electric and the battery electric, and these are the two electric options. When we look at the battery electric, they're really limited in terms of the range that they can provide and the fueling time, or I guess the recharging times that it takes to recharge that battery that will provide energy to the truck. It also has some serious implications with the terms of the battery weight. So what these two means, the first one means that the truck could be out of service for a significant period of time while it is recharging. This is serious because now this asset isn't making money. The problem with the battery weight is the trucks have a limited amount of gross vehicle weight that they are allowed to handle by regulation and for safety reason, right? So if we add more weight to the truck in the form of the battery, this means that the truck can haul less freight, which means it can make less money. This is a concern. On the hydrogen fuel side, it is not limited by these factors. In fact, it's quite comparable to the diesel, the incumbent technology. So it'll have quick refueling times, and it won't have as much, relatively less implications to the vehicle weight. The trucks will cost more money, and we'll have to evaluate that in the future as the manufacturing of these types of trucks get up to scale. Another key benefit of the electric powertrain in either the battery electric or the hydrogen fuel sector is the maintenance costs. And when we were talking with companies, with transportation companies, this was a key driver. They were feeling constrained by the diesel's internal combustion engine's maintenance. So anytime a truck has to go in for maintenance, for repairs, then again, it's out of business. It's not making money. So the industry wants a reliable piece of equipment that they can be assured that it is going to be able to be put in service. Then we can look at fuel costs. So before, I haven't mentioned much the biodiesel option yet, because it is pretty much the same technology as the diesel internal combustion engine. But guess what? That fuel costs a lot of money. It's going to be expensive. But if we shift to a battery electric option, we're pulling electricity off the grid. And because it is a very efficient system, well, there's a potential for savings, energy savings in terms of the fuel cost. On the hydrogen side, right now, you know, it is higher. It is higher than electricity for sure, but it is not out of reach compared to the diesel internal combustion engine. There's still a lot of development that needs to be done in this area, and I plan to talk about this in a bit more later on in the presentation. but it is within reach. It's obtainable. So we have all these factors, you know, and the advantage of one versus the other is going to depend on the, again, on the region and on the duty cycle that it is providing. But we need to look beyond that even. So that these are all fit for service criteria. But we actually need to look at the energy as well. How are we going to get the energy to feed this demand of this sector? Trucking in Canada consumes a lot of energy. How are we going to be able to supply that energy to feed the on-demand requirements of that industry? From the battery electric, this might be challenging. That means it's going to have serious grid implications, and it's going to require a large investment into power generation, and in particular renewable power generation. But on the hydrogen side, we see that we have all the natural resources and the human capital that is needed to really supply energy and feed the fuel to meet the needs of the freight transportation sector. And I really want to dig into this a little bit more because it is really important to Canada and in particular Alberta. And I'll show you why. In Alberta, we like to think of ourselves as being in the oil industry. I'm sure you've heard. And in fact, we are. And this is with good rights, right? So we pull out of the ground approximately 8 exajoules per year of crude oil. So that's 8 with 18 zeros behind it. It's a lot of energy. And what we do is we send it to refineries all across North America. We add a little bit more feedstock in and we convert it to refined petroleum products. And 77% of those refined petroleum products are transportation fuels. So in fact, we are in the transportation fuel business. And this is concerning, particularly again for Alberta, because right now we are feeding a market that is 9 times the size of our own domestic diesel demand. So what happens in a future where this product is no longer demanded? There's no longer a need for this product, which is the core of our primary industry in the province. The province, the country should be concerned. So we need to develop ways so that we can remain in this market. And we believe with hydrogen, there's a lot of promise there so that we can remain a producer, supplier, and exporter of this commodity. So up to this point, I've been sharing much of the analysis and study that CSER has been doing in regard to the trucking sector. But we really haven't been doing this alone. It's not been a literature review. We have been meeting and talking with the trucking industry here in Alberta and in Canada. And in our conversations with the trucking sector, we were met with a great deal of enthusiasm, which is a bit unexpected, but we were impressed by it. And we found that from them, they had a strong desire to be in control of their future and develop technology that will work for their industry. And what that really led to is we were able to build up a group of 12 organizations that really had desire to be a part of something like this, to desire building a new system for Alberta's trucking, in Alberta's trucking industry. And what that came to was the RA's Tech project. So RA's Tech project, which stands for Alberta Zero Emission Truck Electrification Collaboration. This, together with this group of 12 organizations and led by the Alberta Motor Transport Association, we put together a plan alongside Emissions Reduction Alberta. We put together a plan to build and test 2 hydrogen fuel cell electric trucks. And we received funding this spring, and we have been busy putting together this plan, and we continue to today. So here are some details about the ACE Tech project. So again, we are designing and building 2 hydrogen fuel cell electric Class 8 trucks. These trucks will have the capability to travel 700 kilometers at least between refuelings. They will be 63.5 ton, or they'll have 63.5 ton gross vehicle weights, and they will not have tailpipe emissions.
Jessica, sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted, this is a question we probably should have asked it just a little earlier, but the question was, why was natural gas not considered in this comparison? As a renewable. Sorry, why wasn't renewable natural gas considered? Sorry about that.
In this comparison here?
Yes.
Sorry. It's a great question, and actually it was, this analysis was supported by a study that we were doing, and because of time constraints, we scoped out renewable natural gas. But it's a valid question, and it should be something that is considered because, you know, the same rules apply, and these same factors need to be considered. Does it have an impact to the tare weight? Does it have the same power and torque? Will it be able to achieve the same type of range between refueling? You know, these are considerations that are important for the industry because the technology has to be seen as compelling and really fit for the end users, the buyers of the technology. But I would have loved to have reviewed renewable natural gas as well, and maybe we will in the future. So what we were talking about, so the AZTEC project. So these trucks, they will be driving in real revenue operations. They'll be traveling between Edmonton to Calgary and back on a daily basis. There'll be 2 trucks. One will be operated by Trimec, one will be operated by Bison. The hydrogen will be produced from natural gas produced in Alberta using steam methane reforming. And the project will run, it has already started. We're still in the design phase of the project, but it'll run from 2019 to 2021. We'll be building the vehicles. The vehicles should be on the road in July 2021 and be tested for 18 months, and the project will end in December 2022. Zen and the Art of Clean Energy Solution is the project manager for the AZTEC project. So in our discussions with the trucking industry, it was felt that it was very important that we are demonstrating this technology in Alberta. And in fact, it is important that we are designing the technology to meet the needs of transportation in Alberta. And this is important because Alberta has some quite unique transportation needs. We typically handle very heavy loads. So that 63.5 tons of gross vehicle weight is not unusual in the province. And so what this means is we have the V-train configuration hauling 2 tandem trailers. This is typical, and this is something that the industry demands. We're used to long distances all across Canada. Long distance is important, but also we have cold weather. What we heard from the trucking industry is that they were frustrated. They were frustrated with technology being developed to meet the needs of California when it does not work in our conditions. So this is why we need to do it here. And in Canada, in Alberta, it is very important. It will improve the chances of future adoption. And from an Alberta provincial perspective, it can provide us with a competitive advantage. An investment in transportation is really an investment in our economy. It gives us that competitive edge. And then our hopes is that this will lead to further economic development. It could be in the hydrogen economy through the production of fuel, but also through economic development in the transportation and in logistics industry. So for the truck itself, and the picture here is not a picture from the truck, it's just a sample taken from one of our suppliers, or one of our partners, I should say. Some of the details of the trucks is the truck will be operating with electric e-axles that are supplied by Dana Inc., Dana Spicer here. We wanted to build a truck of the future. That means we wanted to have the best technology available on the truck. And the electric axles was the better technology and is more responsive to the road needs and the transportation needs, rather than having a centralized motor. We'll have the fuel cell and battery control system, which will feed the power to the electric axles. The fuel cell is provided by Ballard. These will all be loaded onto a glider. So the frame of the truck The cab of the truck is supplied by Daimler Freightliner. It'll include a hydrogen tank that can hold 100 kilograms of hydrogen, which will be compressed to 350 bar. And that's about 5,000 PSI, for those of you that are more familiar with that unit. The fuel cell will be a PEM fuel cell, but we'll also have some quite large batteries as well. And this is, again, for range assurance, but also provide a little bit of peak power. And it also gives the capability of regenerative braking. So this will give us some fuel efficiency savings. Nodresa, which has actually been recently bought by Dana, is going to be integrating the truck, so putting all the pieces together. So we quickly say that this is a zero emission vehicle, but it is not, because it's really going to depend how we are going to get that hydrogen, how are we going to produce that hydrogen. So in this diagram, what we were looking at is our emissions profile. So this is our current system, the diesel system, and we've worked out what the estimated greenhouse gas emissions are per kilometer. In the diesel system, we are emitting about 1 kilogram of CO2 per kilogram, or per kilometer that we are traveling. And most of these emissions are happening outside that tailpipe there. We have some upstream emissions as well. When we shift to our Aztec project, we're not going to have those tailpipe emissions. They are going to be gone. But we will have emissions at the hydrogen production. So what we are doing is we're converting natural gas to hydrogen, but through that process, there are greenhouse gas emissions. So what we're doing really is we're shifting the greenhouse gas emissions from the tailpipe to upstream. We do receive about a 30% life cycle emissions reduction. So overall, we have some savings, but there are emissions, right? But what we are doing, and this is very important, we are shifting the emissions from where they can't be controlled to where they can be controlled. Through the hydrogen production process, we are creating actually a very pure CO2 stream, which is easily sequestratable. So if we can, in the future phase, and we have the capabilities and resources to do so, if we can capture and sequester and manage 90% of these emissions, we'll be a near zero emission technology. So we'll shift from close to 1.4 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilometer down to 280 grams of CO2 equivalent per kilometers. This is very important. So
Jessica?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead. We have a couple more questions that have come in. First is, how would this compare to a battery electric alternative?
That's an excellent question. That would depend on where you're pulling your electricity from. So the Aztec project is in Alberta. Alberta doesn't have the cleanest grid. In fact, it has one of Canada's most carbon intense grid, right? It's very carbon intense. So if this truck were to be on battery electric and pulling energy from the grid, the greenhouse gas emissions would actually be about 18% higher than this diesel system. That's not good. However, if in the future Alberta moves towards a more renewable grid, so let's say 30% renewable, we'd see somewhere around a 50% reduction. So we have to look at the long term as well, and we have to have confidence that that the Alberta grid is in fact going to be less carbon intense in the future.
Just carrying on with some of the other questions, as far as, do you know what size of the kilowatt load for the fuel cells you're expecting for the hydrogen vehicles?
What size of the fuel cells?
Yeah, like can you revert to kilowatt load for the fuel cell?
Yeah, so we're gonna have 4 70 kilowatt fuel cells.
470 kilowatt. Okay. And another question that came in too earlier, just for clarity, they were just wondering, for making hydrogen, are you using methane or what you're doing for the using natural gas to make the hydrogen? Can you just provide some clarity on that?
Yeah, actually, do you know what? This will actually feed into my next slide, because often I find when I'm speaking with people, maybe not everybody is familiar with the technology that I'm referring to. So I've created this really simplified tutorial, if you will. So I'm just going to go, I know this isn't answering the question yet, but I'm just going to go back to the fuel cell technology, and so you understand what I'm talking about. And again, this is super simplified, understand that. So basically, at the highest level, what we're doing for the fuel cell, we take hydrogen, which comes in a compressed tank. We combine it with oxygen from the ambient air, from the air, and it gets converted into electricity. And then there's also a water vapor product. So that's that. For the hydrogen that we are using for the AZTEC project, we're using a steam methane reform system. So what we are doing, again, super simplified, we are taking natural gas. We put it together with high pressure, high temperature steam. And the outputs of that will be hydrogen, and again, that pure CO2 stream, which we need to capture and sequester and put into the ground, which we see is very possible in the very near future. There is another option, an alternative to produce hydrogen, which we're not exploring here in Alberta for the AZTEC project. And I'm going to explain why that is a little bit later in the presentation. But what this technology is here is actually the reverse of what's going on the fuel cell. You're taking water and electricity, put the two anodes in there, and cathodes, and you get a product of hydrogen and oxygen. So very simple. This is actually a basic grade 9 science project type of thing. So it is basic technology. We are not using this technology. We're looking at the steam methane reform to use our natural gas resource, and I'll explain why later on in the presentation. Dave, did you have another question, or?
I think that's it for at this time, Jessica.
Right. All right, moving forward, I might provide you some more details about the project. So we are using that steam methane reform hydrogen that is produced in Alberta using our natural gas resource. We are purifying it to meet quality standards, which are 99.999% hydrogen, without contaminants that can poison the fuel cell. We are really building a makeshift kind of mobile fueling systems just for the purpose of the project. What we are doing is we are partnered with HTEC, which is based out of Vancouver, to build this mobile fueling system. So what we are doing is we are loading these, what we're calling power cubes, up with hydrogen from the hydrogen production site, which we're still in negotiations with, so I can't advise who that supplier is. But we are loading into these power cubes, and this will be compressed to 450 bar, which is roughly 6,500 PSI. And then we'll be moving these to a fueling site located in Sherwood Park, or perhaps the airport region at the AMTA location. And this will be used to refuel the trucks. And that'll be loaded at the 350 bar. We also have a research component, which of course we are the university and we are a research organization. So we have a heavy emphasis on the research part of this project. What we are wanting to do is really evaluate the performance of the truck and the performance of the fuel cell, and also the social science aspects as well. What do the drivers think? You know, how do they feel? What do the companies think? What do the fleet managers think? You know, we're doing that kind of analysis. But what we see our bigger role, and maybe perhaps more important role, is we are developing a plan to make this bigger. How do we grow this from a 2-truck project, which is the AZTEC project, to a much larger project, 100 trucks, 1,000 trucks? But then how do we also build up that hydrogen economy and infrastructure that is needed to support it? So what we are doing now, and we're working on this starting to work on it quite aggressively, is we're trying to connect with the industry and see where these traffic flows are and where can we build these hydrogen corridors. So what we want to is find where we have a high concentrated level of traffic that we are interested in, and where do we have these hydrogen hotspots. So we already know we have a hydrogen hotspot in Edmonton, in Fort Saskatchewan. We are already one of North America's largest producers of hydrogen. So how do we tap into that? And how do we feed it into our transportation networks? So in all likelihood, there's an opportunity to build a transportation corridor between Edmonton and Calgary. But there are also some other hydrogen hotspots in the province that we want to leverage. Perhaps we can produce hydrogen in Fort McMurray. There are new technologies that can produce hydrogen in SAGD well sites and produce it in situ and keep the carbon in the ground, which is fantastic. So if we can find that we have sufficient traffic traveling from Edmonton to Fort McMurray, maybe this is something that we want to develop. Same thing down to Medicine Hat. Medicine Hat has a large methanol production facility. This product is something that can be converted into hydrogen as well and used to be a hydrogen carrier. Same thing in Grand Prairie, there's some methanol activity there. And then down south in Lethbridge, as many of you may know, there's a lot of wind farms down there. So how can we leverage that? And maybe we can use that green hydrogen down there. So what we're trying to do is really demonstrate that there is a demand from the transportation sector and use that to build up the hydrogen infrastructure and the hydrogen supply at the same time. We estimate that we are going to need fueling stations that are in the 1 to 3 tons of hydrogen per day range, and possibly even more. So these are our goals, and these are what we're working towards, and we're doing a lot of networking to really demonstrate that demand and put those pieces together.
Jessica, just following up, if I could, I know Tom and I both have some questions that we're reading off here. One of the questions is, are you fueling with just a cascading from the mobile storage for this test, or will you have a compression as well?
Yeah. So we are compressing before we put it into the mobile fueler. So there won't be additional compression. No.
Okay, thank you. Tom?
Okay, is there, from this information, is there a similar opportunity for the rest of Canada to do this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have another slide for this. So what we're working on here, what we're trying to do is in Alberta, what we're trying to do is leverage our regional strengths. So our regional strengths is we have an abundance of low-cost natural gas, stranded natural gas that we want to use. We have strong infrastructure networks in the province into the form of pipelines. We have huge human capital in terms of technical expertise, in terms of producing hydrogen. So what we want to do is leverage those strengths. In addition, of course, we have the carbon capture and sequestration resource and capability that we can use and leverage. So this is why we're building the hydrogen ecosystem in Alberta and what we envision for Alberta. But in other areas of Canada, this could look very different. So I'm just going to move on to the next slide here, actually. I talked about why we're pursuing that in Alberta, and so the same could apply in Saskatchewan and Nova Scotia and northern British Columbia, where they have those same type of resources and capabilities. And all of this will be really dependent on the anchor demand from the road freight sector. From road freight sector, but it also because possibly trains, fleet vehicles, maybe airport vehicles, those types of things. And it could also be anchored in exports as well. In other areas of Canada, of course, you don't have that cheap natural gas, and you don't have the carbon capture sequestration capabilities and resources, but they do have cheap electricity and a lot of renewable electricity. So in Quebec, a lot of cheap electricity. Ontario, a lot of nuclear baseload that they need to curtail and utilize, those type of things. So here, maybe green hydrogen that is used through electrolysis makes a whole lot more sense. But again, it will feed into the demand from the freight sector. So if we look across the country to eastern Canada, we can see that between Quebec City to Detroit, this corridor is one of the busiest corridors all across Canada, right? Anybody that's been on the 401 knows there's a lot of trucks there, right? A lot of trucks to feed into that demand. In Montreal, they're already heavily producing liquefied natural gas, so they're liquide. We could tap into that, and they could use their renewable electricity to produce this hydrogen at very low cost. In Ontario, you could use electrolysis from nuclear or other renewable sources, not other renewable, but other sources as well, which could be renewable. Or possibly there's an opportunity to feed into the hydrogen supply that is produced in places like Alberta, and with the carbon sequestered into the ground in Alberta, we could put it into a pipeline, let's say Trans-Canada pipeline. We can blend it into this network and feed into the hydrogen demand that would be over here. So I want to talk now about the cost. This all sounds great, but how's it going to cost? I mentioned before that we're kind of expecting that the hydrogen cost is going to be potentially an issue, right? So what we need to do is look at the energy systems and compare it back to the existing energy system, the diesel internal combustion engine energy system. So again, we're taking oil out of the ground, we are refining it, we sell it retail or wholesale, then retail, and then it gets fed to the trucking companies where the emissions are. If we add up all the costs there, we're looking at just under 90 cents a liter, which is a little about $25 per gigajoule. And this is how we analyze things, always in gigajoules, but we convert it to liters. So if we shift to a new energy system, so this is the natural gas to hydrogen system using the hydrogen fuel cell electric truck, the costs are very different. So in Alberta, like I said before, we have very, very low cost natural gas that we want to utilize. Steam methane reforming is a very mature technology. And you combine it with carbon capture and sequestration, we have that capability and that resource, so it doesn't add a whole lot of extra cost. So what this means is here, these are on the same scale. At the point of production of the hydrogen using steam methane reforming, we're about $1 per kilogram, or about $10 per gigajoule. So that cost is less than the cost of diesel. But the problem is, how do we get the hydrogen from where it is produced to where it's consumed? And here's your wild card here. This is the challenge, is how do we get it to where it needs to be economically? And it's a challenge because hydrogen is a very voluminous gas, which means it's very challenging to transport. So if we use the current technology, the status quo, the easiest path would be to move it by truck. The problem is you can't feed a lot of hydrogen in a truck, in a trailer in a truck to move it from where it is produced to where it is consumed. So you're going to move a truckload and it'll hold about 500 kilograms of hydrogen. But each of the trucks that is feeding to is consuming 100 kilograms of hydrogen. So that truckload is only feeding 5 trucks, right? So this is a problem. It is not really economical and it's not feasible. So we need to look at other options. And this is something that our team is really focused on, is how do we bring down these costs and what other options are. Could we move it by pipeline? Could we blend it with natural gas pipelines and then pull out the hydrogen using pressure swing absorption or something like that? Could we use a hydrogen carrier like ammonia or a hydride? That's possible. And then we'd crack it out or convert it out at the fueling station or nearby the fueling station, something like that as well. There are many possibilities here, and something that we really need to pay attention to. Another possibility could be decentralize the hydrogen production somehow. And it's a possibility, but it has to be done in a scale that is economical. What we really need to do is see that the price of hydrogen is within this $3.50 to $5 range. And this will be competitive and comparable to what we see in the current system, which is about $25 per gigajoule, which is the low end of this range. However, again, because the hydrogen fuel cell electric powertrain is more efficient than the diesel powertrains, we see this as competitive and obtainable. Now we want to look at the green hydrogen. So this is the hydrogen that is produced from electricity. Well, this is all going to depend on the price of electricity. And also the electrolysis price. The technology is quite expensive as well. So I'm using numbers from literature, from a levelized cost of ownership of producing electricity. This may be cheaper in other areas of Canada, such as such as Quebec or maybe even Ontario. So this is at $40 per megawatt hour, or 4 cents per kilowatt hour. We're coming in at the low end of, sorry, we're coming in here at probably at close to that competitive range. But if the delivered price of electricity is, you know, in the 8 cents per kilowatt hour, which is reasonable, we are quite a bit more expensive, and this may be out of reach for some jurisdictions. But again, another, I guess, opportunity with the green hydrogen is perhaps it's easier to decentralize. So maybe we can use electrolysis systems that are located closer to where the hydrogen is consumed. So we'll find the savings in the distribution side. So there are all types of opportunities to consider. So now I want to talk to, I've been talking about trucking and the application of using hydrogen in trucking. But really the opportunity is much bigger than only serving the trucking industry. And I'm going to discuss this a little bit more. So on this slide here, what this pie diagram is showing is our existing demand for energy in Canada. So in this blue section here, this is our demand for really fuels. So we consume gasoline in the personal mobility sector for driving our cars, and we consume diesel for freight transportation, and then there's other modes as well. We also consume fossil fuels in the form of heat. So this is natural gas feeding into industry as a feedstock, and as a feedstock here, but as a heat source here, for our commercial buildings here, and for our homes. This is our demand for energy. And then we have a demand for electricity. When we look at this, we really see three separate disconnected energy systems: oil, natural gas, and electricity. It's fragmented, right? But it also has very high greenhouse gas emissions. We already talked about transportation greenhouse gas emissions. Those are out of the tailpipe, hard to manage. But then we also have emissions on the natural gas side as well, and then on the industrial feedstock side. Electricity, we can manage that and mitigate that through renewable electricity if we can manage the intermittency of that electricity production. But if we envision ourselves moving to a new low carbon energy system while utilizing hydrogen, we can see a more simple energy system. We move from a disconnected three energy system to a two energy system that is highly integrated. So we can feed hydrogen to meet all of these needs, but we can also use hydrogen to integrate with our electricity systems. So if we build up our renewable electricity in times of peak, where we have a surplus of power, we could use that electricity now to produce hydrogen. And likewise, when we have a shortage of supply, we can use that hydrogen to feed into our electricity system. On the hydrogen side also, we have the opportunity to produce biofuels, should we have the need for the liquid fuels still. This is a much simpler and more flexible system that is going to meet all of our needs there. Also, it has the potential to be minimal or zero emissions, which would help us reach that top of that mountain to reach our 80% reduction or that zero emission target as well. And then potentially we can offset and achieve those negative CO2 emissions through the biofuel aspects as well. The challenge will be, I guess the opportunity will be, is what does this pathway look like? We need to get to that peak of the mountain where we can achieve this integrated system, but we need to find the innovations that will be on that pathway to get us there, that are both credible and compelling as well. So that is the end of the presentation. I hope that you found it interesting and insightful as well. So I guess I'll pass it to Dave if there's any more questions.
All right, so thank you very much, Jessica. Sorry, this isn't Dave, just to give you that little hi. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to open up the lines for any further questions. Are you open? Do you have time for that, Jessica?
I have a few minutes, I guess, 5 minutes.
Okay, well, we'll take a couple of questions. Just we'll make that opportunity available, though, in case anybody else has anything here. All right. Okay, my unmuting may or may not be working, but if...
Hi, can I have a question, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Zakul Kabir. I am with Yosemite Clean. We're a company in California. My question was if Jessica could comment about the steam reforming, and she talks about carbon capture and sequestration. Is it some sort of an absorption-based reforming technology, or is it reforming, catalytic reforming, and then separating of the hydrogen through a PSA system, followed by carbon capture? If she could comment about that, that would be helpful. Thank you.
So great question. So there's various technology options, as you know. There are more modern ways to perform the steam methane reforming with really essentially a pressure swing absorption, kind of a 4-stroke engine type of steam methane reforming, where you're separating the hydrogen from the CO2. You know, and that's a possibility. But the other possibility is use an amine solution to pull out the hydrogen, or sorry, the carbon dioxide. Well, we like to see, ideally, like we would like to see carbon capture technology introduced or retrofitted into our existing steam methane reformers. But as we move to new options and new facilities, we would like to integrate the carbon capture capability within that new facility and the new technology. And that would have to be, you know, of course, analyzed and reviewed by those that are developing the facility. They're putting that in place.
Yeah. All right. Is there anybody else that has any questions? I'm just going through and trying to unmute everybody here.
Just one quick one. Can you comment on the timeline for this project, please?
Right. So right now we are in the design phase of the project, and we hope to have the trucks on the road in June or July 2021, and they'll be on the road for 18-month period for 2022. But as we look to do scale up right now, we're trying to, again, have really demonstrate demands. We hope to be well on our way to having much larger projects by the time this project is done.
All right. All right. We think we can take one more question. Is there anybody else that would like to ask anything?
Peter Mickelson with Suncor Energy. I just wondered if Jessica, you're aware of any initiatives by the Alberta government to promote carbon capture and sequestration. There is, I guess, the Alberta carbon trunk line that's nearing completion. Is there anything going on with that you're aware of?
So I know that Emissions Reduction Alberta has a particular focus on CCS, CCUS, with their the Grand Challenge projects, the X Games, that kind of thing. But I'm afraid I don't know the specifics of their work in this area.
Okay.
Peter, it's Dave Arkell speaking. Matter of fact, one of our future webinars, I think scheduled for February, is for carbon capture. So that's certainly that topic I suspect will be addressed during that webinar as well, if you can wait till February.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you.
So it's Chris Wolf here. I'm not sure if you have time for one more call, Jessica, but could you maybe elaborate on the in-situ hydrogen production technology from Proton?
Sure. So Proton Technologies is a company that is based out of here in Calgary and is grown out of the University of Calgary. And what they're looking to do is really produce hydrogen in situ, so that means underground in the well. So, and again, I'm going to explain this in the simplest terms, so don't criticize me for this, but basically what's happening is they're throwing a combustion, they're putting oxygen down the well site to cause a combustion underground. And what's going to happen is the hydrogen is going to bubble up and it's going to be separated using a membrane, or pulled out using a membrane. The carbon dioxide will stay in the ground and the hydrogen will be pulled out. It's quite an exciting technology, and what's really exciting about it is it is potentially very low cost, so it is going to give us that cost competitive advantage.
Indeed, Jessica. Yeah, low cost and carbon free. Further to Mr. Nickerson's question in terms of the carbon trunk line, with a clean source of hydrogen and a pure source of CO2, it is possible to make renewable methanol in that area, and that's something to consider.
All right. Well, I think we've run out of time today, but I just wanted to thank you again, Jessica, for giving us a lot of great information today. We're actually going to be posting this on our website following this webinar. This has been recorded today, so people can review the information again. Please do feel free to send us a note if you do have any pressing questions you really want answered, and we can definitely put you in touch and try to get you those answers. So without any further ado, thank you so much, Jessica, for your time today, and thanks everybody very much for joining in on today's webinar.
And still, please keep a note that we plan to have ongoing webinars on energy efficiency, energy reductions, and GHG emission reductions. So please keep an eye out on your emails as well. Thank you so much, Jessica. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, everybody.